Tagline for this panel is what technology and strategies are making it possible for those with the smallest budgets and staffs. And with these small staffs, finding solid student help is just huge. And John, one of your biggest challenges, not having a broadcast major at Carthage, so there's no obvious place to recruit students. So where do you find your help, and how do you plug those students in?
We end up sending it out through a thing we have at Carthage called The Bridge, and all the students look at it and see all job descriptions. We take that in. When I first started 4 years ago, they kind of hired anybody who applied. Starting last year, we've been interviewing and trying to get more skilled workers, and I think we've done a good job with that. Our major issue is because they aren't broadcasting majors. They sometimes take it as, oh, I'm here to just get a paycheck and hold a camera or run a camera, and it's not as much I really care about what I'm putting out there, and that's one of the struggles we have to work with, is making sure that they have that pride in what they do and finding those students who will have that.
And Michelle, no guarantee that they'll have the pride, obviously, but you do have a really solid broadcast program there at Elon, so that's got to help you a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really fortunate to have really great school communications at Elon, and right now I'm kind of heading up a partnership between the school communications and athletics, which is an even better resource and something that I've really been excited to start with. But, you know, one of the challenges we face is that Elon students have a tendency to do like a million different things. So, for example, I have one student here with me today that worked with me directing broadcasts and also did a dance film thesis, and worked on the Elon News Network, all these shows. So part of it is reining in those students early and saying, hey, you're going to come work for me and you're going to like it, and forget about all the other stuff. So that's kind of part of it, is, you know, making it interesting, making it worth their while professionally and educationally, obviously.
And Michael, you've had some great relationships there on campus that have led to some great students as well.
Yeah, we got two programs that actually were able to get students from the media production and studies and VCT, visual communication and technology. And, you know, they're part of the VCT program is they need to do 3 co-ops throughout their tenure there. So we get a lot of students that need to fulfill that, and it's been great. It's grown over the past couple of years, and looking forward to keep that growing.
Richie, when you have a largely student-based production, and it's obviously a challenge to people who are not well versed in the field, what kind of problems are you seeing, and how do you help them solve that?
Well, obviously, training is a big issue. So one of the things that we've done in our edit interface is to allow button setups that mimic Avid and Adobe environments, so that if you're familiar with those tools, or as you're becoming familiar with those tools, they transition over into our editor very easily. And then also automation, especially with metadata entry, to help cut down on just labor and the time it takes to enter in information.
Mike, some of these schools end up having not enough students to handle all events, but I know they're coming to you and really finding an easier way to go about one of the key aspects in a production, because people can figure it out if they're on mute or just can't pay attention, but the score bug, when it takes, as opposed to a skilled bug operator, you have a way to help us with that.
Well, the core where we started was in just scoreboard metadata and moving it, but what we've evolved to is really more automated workflows, where you often will have just that one operator, and he's got to run laptops and computers and cameras, and starting to enable these to talk, and establishing partnerships with other vendors where there's intercommunication between that has become important. So things like that enables the operators and the colleges to do single camera, one operator, no operator productions.
There's going to be a couple of microphones circulating around, so I'll be thinking of your questions. Obviously, a lot of talented people up here who do a lot with a little, and I'm sure you'll come up with some questions that you'd like to ask them. before we get too far along. But we all talked last week leading up to this about the topics that we would want to cover on the dais. And Michelle, you pointed out that prioritizing obviously is a huge deal, and having an athletic director that's really tuned in to your department makes all the difference. So tell us about your process there at Elon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the best things you can do is get in an office with your athletic director and your direct supervisor and say, what are our priorities? And maybe that's live streaming, maybe it's in-venue video board, maybe it's creative content to go on social media. That might be different for every department, but figuring out what is that priority, what am I supposed to be focusing my time and energy on? And further than that, am I focused on equity across all sports, or am I focused on, I'm going to do a little bit extra for football and basketball because those are my revenue sports? Those are all questions that you want to be asking with your athletic director, your direct supervisor, whoever that may be. So as other things are coming up and, women's soccer comes flying out of left field, like we need this video for whatever, to pump up our game this weekend, you can kind of look and say like, hey, I have a list of priorities here, and this, goes right up to my AD who says like, I need to be focused on like live streaming, and this week, football's the priority, so like unfortunately I can't do that. And you always have backup and a place to stand, because one of the biggest things when you're by yourself is, as painful as it is sometimes, you have to learn to say no. And when you've kind of laid out those priorities and laid out like, this is my job, this is what I'm doing, it's a lot easier to be able to point to that and say, hey, I can't do it because of X, Y, Z, than just obviously flat out saying no or something like that.
And it's not always just saying no to your boss, it's sometimes just saying no to yourself and thinking that I'm going to kill myself to do all of this right now, and having to pull back a little bit. Michael, you pointed out to me how critical it was to know your limitations, but sometimes it can be hard for your superiors to understand that.
Yeah, I think that you just got to know what you can do with what you have, and just try to make the most of what you have. And sometimes it's not all about quantity, it's about quality, and trying to just get them to understand how many students you have and just what you're able to accomplish. And when they see that maybe this is too much, then maybe they back off and they say, okay, let's let him, or you guys just work within the means.
Yeah, and having to work within those means, Richie, this being able to centralize a lot of things and have one person potentially do things that normally you would have to find 3 or 4 people to do is something that a lot of people are coming to you to looking for help with.
Exactly. One of the benefits of working with Blackbird is it allows us to bring in content from a number of sources, SDI, NDI, from an S3 bucket, from an HLS stream or an RTMP stream, and centralize where all that media is landing, and then provide a single pane of glass for an edit interface that delivers to the different social and web platforms.
John, with your high expectations for everything you guys are doing at Carthage, when you get to that point where you have to say no and maybe just punt for a more simple production, it's got to be difficult for you to make those decisions, but again, it goes back to those partnerships and that understanding that your superiors may have.
Yeah, we struggle especially in the spring because we have lacrosse, volleyball, and baseball who all are in different locations and all schedule games at the same time on a Saturday. And part of that has to do with how we prioritize it, and part of that prioritization came from the first set of bigger equipment we got and first TriCaster we got was when they redid the baseball field, and so it was actually built into their capital project. So they sort of won priority, because if we didn't do their stuff, we wouldn't have the equipment. And so it has something to do with, well, that is a little bit more important for us. But we definitely, when that comes, we have to struggle with, where do I put my students? Because I'll stay at baseball, which means my most experienced students would then be somewhere else. So I can trust that the stream will be handled as well as it can be for them and for the teams, so that we're not giving a different level of stream to one or the other, or trying our best not to.
Mike, when you see these folks come to you and show you these are my priorities, I think probably the biggest benefit from what Sportzcast offers is that you get down the line and maybe it is not a top level priority, but you can still make it look like an equally good show, adding in the elements that you can provide.
Well, what we hear from schools is they do want to do all of the sports at the same time. Tennis, that's not one production, that's 6 courts of production, and tennis is often left out. You know, baseball and softball, and it all happens on the same day, and you've got one SID. So we provide the tools where you can manage all of those, get it on the air, get it in high def, audio, video, high quality graphics, and manage it from a single portal. I think a good example is everyone that knows softball. University of South Florida does big tournaments because we're from Florida and we know how great the weather is. Over a course of several weekends, 200 games are produced for the U.S. University of South Florida USF series, and it was all run by one operator to televise the entire event.
A couple of you talked about investing in yourself, and certainly something I run into personally. You're going 100 miles an hour, you're trying to get so many different projects done. You have to take a pause and realize there are times where you have to find a way to improve your own abilities and grow in your job so you can advance, whether it's within your own university or up to a larger production or whatever you'd like to do in your career. So, Michael, we can start with you on that, because that's one of the first things that you brought up with me is taking that time out to find a way to improve, as opposed to just managing and just pushing content.
Right, and you know, as I told you before, we can all get caught up in trying to get X, Y, and Z done for football game, hockey game, whatever it may be. But then, when do you take a step back and try to figure out how to make your department better, how to make your multimedia department better? And do you go to 360 video, drone footage, you know, and then you worry about your personal skill set and what new thing is there in After Effects, Cinema 4D, you know, various things like that. And sometimes it can be hard whenever you're one person with a few students to take time to do that, because then when you're doing that, sometimes something else isn't getting done. So you have to kind of find a happy medium there.
Michelle, same with you, just with all of the quality content that you're pushing out, how often do you take a chance to kind of reevaluate where you are, both as a department and personally in your growth in your position?
Yeah, I mean, I think I try and take some pauses throughout the year. You know, once every crossover season ends, you know, I can kind of look back and be like, okay, you know, where do we land on basketball? What was good? What was bad? What can we move on to? But, you know, for me, that's what the summer is really all about. It's this is my 7th year at this conference, coming here, networking with people, learning from other people, and then just, you know, laying out, you know, what's the next thing we want to do? You know, a few years ago at Elon, we really wanted to invest in live. So that's what I chose to invest in myself, was locking myself in the control room with the Expression for days at a time, learning everything about that. And, you know, now it's a little bit more of a shift that, you know, we have a new basketball arena. We really need to focus on big board content or creative content. And at that point, you know, it's like, all right, what are other places doing that I can kind of look and learn from? And, you know, the summer's a great time for that. You know, the thing I always recommend to people is plan out your summer. It goes by really fast. So, you know, if you know, hey, in June, the first 2 weeks of June, I just need to, like, get myself organized. I have 14 baseball games that haven't been archived, like, do that. You know, last 2 weeks of June, like, okay, like, let me learn some new skills. Let me do an After Effects tutorial. Let me, you know, sit down with the Expression or whatever the case may be. And then, you know, July, August, you know, you can plot out what do I need to do to start planning. But, you know, the more you plan out that summer and know what you're doing with those blocks, the more productive you can be, so that you don't get to August 20th and you're like, oh my God, everything's starting.
John, I'm sure it somewhat mimics Michelle's answer, but tell me about your summer and how you plan to use this time to get better personally and as a department.
Yeah, I would agree with almost everything Michelle said, but to add a little bit more, like I've sat down and I met with all my students and developed ideas when they finished what we need to do better with them, what I need to do better personally with them, and also in terms of our productions. And then this week is a good week. I think in the first talk, I wrote down a page of notes, and a lot of it I really want to implement. And this summer, we'll be sitting down and figuring out how I'm going to implement some of that stuff. Also, watching a bunch of tutorials and getting better at personally so that I can do a better job and provide a better resource for the college.
And Richie, kind of along the same lines, this being the right time to figure out how to do things better, that's a big reason that you want to visit with so many people this week and help them in growing what they do and allowing for more time to add even more projects and a different level.
Well, exactly, and obviously SVG, and specifically SVG College, is a great venue to network and share information, and not only between each other, but with other vendors. And basically being able to trust a vendor and to tell them what your issues are is the key to being able to solve your problem in a short way. And vendor-based training is also something you should rely heavily on.
We have a couple of microphones floating around, as I mentioned before. If anybody has a question, we can go ahead and start with that now. We do have one up in front. Or anybody else? Right there.
Kind of a two-parter here, a general question. When you're trying to bring in new students and some help, do you focus on more individual training with them, or do you have any moments in a week or per month or bi-monthly where you sit down and have a big gathering of them and then run them through what your programs are, teach them just monthly things, and then maybe for John, what are some of the things you sit down with your students and what have you learned, for example, this past year? What did you pick up that you needed to improve on? So tackle that however you want.
I can tackle the first part of the question a little bit. I try really hard to get all my students in the room at the same time and do a training session. It never works. Like I said at Elon, everyone's so overextended that I have a hard time with that. So kind of like the guys on the ACC panel we were talking about earlier, a lot of trial by fire. Like if you're a freshman your first week of school and you want to come run camera at a soccer game, I'm like, all right, let's dig in, I'll show you how to do it. And again, using, one of the biggest things I can suggest is using your student crew to train your student crew. That's the thing, is every time, when I have a freshman, I'm like, all right, you're going to go set up this camera. This is Elizabeth, she's a senior, she's going to set it up with you, talk you through the whole thing, make sure it goes right. So sometimes for me it's hard to do the monthly things. I like to, it's just really hard scheduling wise, but I try and kind of get with students one-on-one as needed and kind of pair them with the older students as much as I can.
Michael, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
Well, for the second part of that question, when I sat down with them, I kind of figured out how everything went, how they thought everything went, and while I was sitting down with them, I developed my sort of experience for the year and how we need to improve that, and part of that has to do with our creativity and storytelling through the events. I think that we do a really good job when the game is going on, showing the game and showing what's happening, but when there's a timeout or halftime, they think it's a break, and we need to do a better job, and I need to do a better job getting that out of them, and that's one of the major takeaways I took this year. And it's hard because, as Michelle said, a lot of it's on-the-job training. Oh, you haven't ran camera before and you don't know what a lacrosse game is, because not many people do. Here you go. And part of that is doing a better job of explaining the sports to them before they get there. And maybe one of the things I want to do this summer is come up with training videos that sort of explain how we cover the games and let them watch that before they come.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I have, because the school year starts right when our athletic season starts, sometimes it's hard to just get everyone in a room and just teach them everything. Sometimes you have to teach on the fly. And for us, unlike these guys, we're more heavy on post-production because we have the live set covered from our PBS company. So we're more focused on creating a green screen video in After Effects for maybe a football game. So it kind of goes, the projects go by skill and interest of what the student is. And then the other point to that is to, as Michelle was saying, is try to return your students as much as you can to help indoctrinate the new students and make sure the student that is teaching the other student and the student being taught still knows that they can come to you for help and not that you're just so busy that you can't, teach them, let them know they can still come to you. And that relieves a little bit off your plate. And it also allows the student that's teaching the other one to add something to their confidence. And then as they're going out to get that first job, they can say all the things that they did with teaching at that job.
Going down the line, I'm just curious because this is how I was when I first got to college. Walk in that room, and all I had interest in is being on air. That was, and finally figured out, oh, there's so many other things I can do to actually be employed by learning all these other things down the line. Just from our school folks here, when you walk in, what's the turnover? How many people will walk in and say, oh, I don't immediately get to be your play-by-play guy? I'm heading out. How hard is it to retain students?
It's really challenging. I've lost count of the number of students I think that come in and, day one, freshman year, are like, I want to be the play-by-play for men's basketball. I'm like, okay, that's cool. How about, we get you started shadowing some volleyball games, doing some color, doing play-by-play for that. Once you've proven your worth, like, yeah, we can talk about basketball. Like, I'm open to that. And they're like, oh, well, I only want to do basketball. I was like, well, there's a finite number of basketball play-by-play jobs out there. And if you really pay attention, most of the people doing play-by-play for basketball are doing all the other sports too. So there's a lot of turnover. It's hard. It's one of those things where when I'm talking to students when they're first coming into school, I'm looking a lot more at character than skill necessarily, because, if I have a kid that comes in and is clearly going to work hard and has this eagerness to learn and just a thirst to do whatever it takes, like, I'm going to take that person and just, like, fix whatever skills I need to. Like, I can work on all that, but I cannot make them be humble and be hungry to learn something. So I think that's one of my biggest things is, you might have a really good kid coming out of high school that is an incredible play-by-play guy, but if his ego's too big and to fit in the room, then, that I personally don't want to work with them. So that's kind of my strategy.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, with one of our academic programs, because they have to do paid co-ops, so if they do one with us, then I might not be able to return them because they fulfilled that responsibility. But with doing with our other academic program, you try as much as you can to maybe, I'm sure everybody would love to pay their students. Sometimes we can't pay all of them. So if you tell them, hey, if you work with us this year, it won't be paid. But if you do X, Y, and Z, maybe we can promote you. And that's how I'm trying to return our students. It's not always the case, but if you get one, I'll take that every day.
Yeah. John, you need to have people at your institution obviously buy into what you're doing, not just because your position is so important, but because it's the front porch. And we talk about that countless times working in college athletics. If the buy-in is there from the president level down, you'll hopefully get everything you need. How hard has it been for you to let the people at Carthage know these are the benefits that you're going to have if you help me do what I do here?
Yeah, especially Carthage being a small school, we don't get as much of a footprint out into the world as some of the bigger schools. But an example of showing and proving that we do something that people recognize is our AD comes back from the conference meeting and says, well, there are 2 schools that outsource their streaming stuff because they can't keep up with us. And taking that and all the feedback we get and showing that the higher ups in the administration that when you do 122 games in terms of athletics, and our student crew also does music events on campus with another staff member, and so that's about another 50, and then overall we get 60,000 people watching our events. Well, that's a really good amount where you get recruits, you get paying students, because all our recruits as a Division III school pay something, seeing our product and seeing what Carthage can put out, and hopefully they end up coming to the school.
Mike and Richie, I'll have you follow up on a similar path, just the excitement level that you see working with these collegiate programs and the ability to add to what they're doing, the tremendous benefits that what you offer will help them with. Just tell me about that buy-in and how you have to see how you maybe convince those folks like you work with us, and potentially that buy-in is going to be even greater.
Yeah, it's interesting the way Sportzcast came about was a daughter, a student athlete. It's like, how do you follow that? And when she went off to become a pitcher, it was you've got today, a parent expects, I want to see my sport, my child. Your audience might just be the student athlete's parents, but some of the sports it comes out that way. The recruiting, it's important, getting it out there, and then what they're going to continue on later. It's a big deal to do the web streaming.
Yeah, I think helping build a sense of community is obviously a big deal, and a sense of belonging. And then from a salesy standpoint, maybe being able to generate revenue as a part of the efforts that you're going through. And I think we can help do that with appropriate metadata and delivering valuable content that other people may be interested in, whether you had a successful outcome to a game or not.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? See one right in the middle and one in the back. We'll go to the back.
Yeah, question for the college coordinators. What's one tool or product that you have that maybe you could share with everyone that you couldn't live without?
Shared server. Yeah, I would say going from year 1 to year 2, working off of hard drives, to investing, researching, and figure out what shared server would be best, and then making sure your students know how to save to that server and not to the desktop.
This will sound like a staged plug, but I swear it wasn't, or it isn't. But Sportzcast is something we actually use a lot in the score bots and pulling in score data. The fact that I don't have to worry about the score getting updated or the clock running, just that little thing as a piece off my mind is actually wildly wonderful. Just not having to worry about one additional component. I think that's one thing that I would be hard pressed to get rid of.
I could come up with a few products, but I think what we were talking about before, I definitely couldn't live without my students. I'd go crazy if I didn't have the group of students that at least show up on a day-to-day basis and are willing to try, and if they make a mistake, we'll move on and get better at it. But without them, I wouldn't be able to use any of the products, so that's what I'd go with.
Good stuff. In the middle?
How y'all doing? So my question is, a lot of that we've been talking about has been about web streaming or broadcast, but how do you cover, being smaller schools, social media? If you have video boards, do you have to cover content for in-game for those boards? How do you take care of that? Do you use students, or do you just spread yourself thin and try to do that as well?
Students. I don't think I can express enough how much success you will have if you give students the chance to be autonomous and to kind of take ownership of a product. I could sit with a group of 20 students and tell them what I want them to do all day, and they might do it, they might not, but if they care about what they're doing, they're going to blow you away. So for example, there's a group of students that works with our football team and pretty much nonstop on social media content, and they do an incredible job. And really, a lot of the work that's coming out of there is them having the idea and having the drive to go out and do it themselves and ask for what they need. And, I have nothing to do with that. I'm pretty hands off. Sometimes I'm just like, hey, do you need any advice? Have you thought about this? Okay, carry on. So it's one of those things that once you find a good group and just give them the chance, they'll honestly surprise you. I'm really fortunate. I work with a lot of students that are far more talented than me, whether they realize it or not. So, for me, it's anytime I can leverage that, I'll absolutely do so.
I'd like to throw something out about the social media. Everyone in broadcast, you look at your audio and your video and you think that's your most important asset. That's what you broadcast. But the metadata of your game, the stats, what's on the scoreboard actually drives editing. It drives the cutting. It's the core of the data required that pushes social media out, because everybody wants to know, I just scored a touchdown. It was number 14 passed to 86, and you want to push that out. And today you probably got the social media. If it's a bigger school, you've got the whole social media department. Some of the smaller schools, they don't. So what's about to happen in the production and all the vendors out here is we're talking, we're sharing this metadata, and we're enabling things like that to happen where the school still controls it with their template. So if you don't have the big departments, think about ways of using what you do have to automate the delivery of that.
Another question near the back. Mr. Satoon from southeastern Louisiana, up for a couple of awards tonight.
Thank you, Chris. I would like, the previous session was about a centralized control room with the ACC. For those of you who are producing live game events, do any of you use a centralized control room? Have you fibered, or is it IP? You going wireless with various sports, or do you have plans for that? And if you have fibered already, if you can share, what type of ballpark cost to various venues have you experienced?
I'm not directly with.
Do we have any CFOs on the dais?
So we're working on this at Elon right now. We have a new basketball arena coming online this summer, and the goal of that is to have a centralized control room and to have it fibered to all the other venues. I feel like this is a conversation that I've been having on campus for 4 or 5 years, or I've only been there for 4 years. 4 years, but yeah. So we're going the fiber route and basically branching out. For me, I started this conversation early, knowing that we wanted to get that infrastructure in place while the ground was dug up for that basketball arena, literally. Fortunately, I haven't had to be the one that deals with costs, so I can't speak to that. I know it was a large number. But, the sell I've been making on this the whole time I've been at Elon is, when you invest in that infrastructure, the sky's the limit, basically, on what you can do later. So, right now, am I going to be running 10 cameras at football? No, but I will be able to in the future. So for me, laying out that infrastructure is kind of thinking of the future, thinking of what we might need, and kind of relaying to the parties on campus how this is going to be useful, and why it's worth the investment. And fortunately, I have a lot of athletic administration on my side and campus technology, so we've been fortunate to be able to do that at our level.
Michael and John, just real quick, because we have to wrap things up, but a quick hit on that topic.
Yeah, so as I said before, the control room piece is controlled by our PBS company, WBGU TV, but I can speak to how that is set up. So there is a control room at our Stroh Center, which houses both basketballs and volleyball. It's live camera for both basketballs, and then that was underground fiber to our hockey arena 2 years ago when we got a board there. And then we have they have a TriCaster set up for football. And then they have a separate room for ESPN3 where they have Ross Carbonite and Expressions and all that stuff. As far as cost, I'm not quite sure, but just from being around it, that's what I'm able to contribute.
We really don't have a centralized control room. We have 3 facilities right now that we stream out of, and 2 of them are permanent control rooms. The other one for baseball, because the press box is standing on its own, gets torn down at the end of the season and put back up when it starts, because winters in Wisconsin aren't very good for equipment. But we are, I believe, going to start working on our softball field. And one of the things my boss and I have talked about is, because it's on the other end of campus, seeing what we can do to get it at least to one of those control rooms or something a little bit closer to all our other athletic events, so that it's easier to run multiple events at once. And I would only have to go a couple feet if there was an issue instead of on the other side of campus.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Again, John, Richie, Michelle, Michael, and Mike, we appreciate your time and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.